Hello, and welcome to Hopeful Conversations brought to you by Robbie's Hope Foundation. I am your host, Kari Eckert. Joining me today is Cyndie Spiegel, two-time author of bestseller A Year of Positive Thinking, Daily Inspiration, Wisdom, and Courage, and her recently published book, Microjoys, Finding Joy, Especially When Life is Not Okay. Cyndie is also the founder of Dear Grown Ass Women, a membership community for women 35 years of age or older for personal development and deep connection. Cyndie is an empowering speaker working to help others realize a more illuminated and bolder life. Cyndie, thank you so much for joining me today on Hopeful Conversations.
Oh, thank you for having me, Kari. It's my pleasure to be here.
You've recently released your second book, Microjoys, Finding Hope, Especially When Life is Not Okay. Can you give us a brief background of the inspiration behind writing about microjoys?
Yes. So, as you mentioned before, I wrote a book in 2018 called A Year of Positive Thinking. So, I had really become known as someone who was quite positive and sassy and uplifted, and all of those things are true. And when 2020 rolled around, collectively, we were in a global pandemic. We were in quarantine. And 3 months into the pandemic, everything around me fell apart. The life that I once knew was no longer that. You know, my 32-year-old nephew was murdered walking to a friend's house. Within 4 months of my nephew's passing, my mother passed away unexpectedly. Within a month of that, my brother had a stroke and then went into cardiac arrest and spent the next 10 weeks in the ICU.
During COVID?
But during COVID, yep, all of this during COVID. So there were no visitors, none of that. And by the grace of God, he made it home, Kari. And when he did, within a month of that, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And all of what I just described happened within a 10-month period of time. So I went from this woman who was speaking on stages in front of hundreds and thousands of people, and really building this platform around positive thinking, which I am a huge proponent of, to this woman whose life fell apart. And in those moments at that time, the last thing I wanted to do was think. I didn't want to think positively or otherwise. I needed to simply feel, right? I didn't need to think. And I just felt like when I looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize who I was. And it really became this moment where as Microjoy slowly started to evolve, I started to recognize myself again. Because what I realized was that in those moments when we fall to our knees, and we will all have those moments at one point or another,
Absolutely.
and it will look different than mine or yours, but we will have them. You know, in those moments, everything I thought I knew to be true about the world didn't seem to apply. And then I felt such guilt for having written this book that was a bestseller. And I thought, why is it that I can't tap into those tools right now? Why is it that I can't be positive right now? And the truth of the matter was that wasn't what I needed in that moment. I needed to grieve. I needed to feel sorrow. I needed to feel the hardest things and move through the hardest things. And that was hard. That was difficult, right? Because it feels much easier, and it feels like a little bit of a cop-out, but it feels much easier to feel good, things that are perceived as good. And I couldn't do it at that moment. And so I remember slowly sort of noticing what was directly in front of me. And that's what eventually became known as microjoys, these sort of existing moments of beauty that are there regardless of our current circumstance. And so I started to talk on social media about it, and the language picked up, and people would share their own microjoys with me. But that's where I was. That was the origin story of the book. And I'm sure we'll get into so much more.
You just said beautifully that your definition of microjoys, existing moments, you have to repeat it for me.
Sure. I'll give you a more concise definition. Easily accessible moments of joy that exist regardless of our current circumstances. easily accessible moments of joy. So think of that as the daffodils that are blooming outside. It doesn't matter what I'm going through, those daffodils are still going to bloom, right? Think of it as those three butterflies that cross your path. Doesn't matter what you're going through, that's still going to happen. Or the conversation you're having with a stranger. It has nothing to do with what I'm going through. These moments of beauty, these moments of joy exist in the world, regardless of how much we are struggling. And microjoys are simply taking notice of what is already there while not trying to change our current circumstances. Right? So it's not trying to change the fact that my mom passed away and I miss her dearly. It simply coexists. These moments of beauty coexist with what I am going through, and they become these moments of respite in the midst of difficult times.
It's really powerful. I'm processing because I read your book and I love it. I feel like you are just like this fiery personality that I love how you explained your like who you thought you were and then what you've gone through, and where you are now. I just feel like there's just, and you talk about this in your book, but the wisdom,
Yeah.
you say timeless wisdom.
Because I think for so many of us, right, we are all going to become different versions of ourselves, right?
Yeah,
Sometimes we'll perceive that as good. Sometimes we'll perceive that as bad. But we are always evolving and shifting and changing. And in those moments, we don't have to take the time to look for the wisdom. We don't. And that's really important to me. You know, as I said before, I needed to sit, I needed to grieve, I needed to be sad, I needed to be angry. But in time, there is wisdom that shows itself from those moments of evolution, you know, and that's really what this book is about. But these aren't necessarily things that I recognized while I was in it. And I think that's important to say because, you know, there's this whole world of toxic positivity, Kari, where folks feel like they can't feel sad, they can't grieve because you know what, good vibes only. And it drives me up a wall because we are entitled to feel not good vibes. It is human to feel not good vibes, to feel days of sadness and despair and anger. That is part of the human condition, right? And so this toxic positivity that I'm referring to is really this notion that we should only feel good things and we should force ourselves out of anything that is perceived as negative so that we can get to that happy place again. And that's not what
doesn't work
life
that way.
is.
No, no.
No, we have to be with all of it.
Yeah. Like how we're always changing as humans. I'm wondering, like, obviously I have changed significantly and I've had those moments where I've looked in the mirror and said, I don't know who that is. I've looked at
Yeah.
pictures of me. I'm kind of get it like teary eyed even thinking about this, like, prior to my loss. And it's like, I
Yes.
don't even know who that was. I'm just kind of wondering, like that wisdom that I feel like I'm working to gain, and you obviously I think have. That's like, I mean, we're always working and growing, but is it because of our just collective life experiences? Um, does that question kind of make sense a little bit?
Yeah, it does. You know, there is a reason that someone who God bless them, make it to 100 years old, they hold so much wisdom, right? Oftentimes wisdom comes with lived experience. It's not always just time, right? It's your own lived experience. So you can be 16 and have a lot of lived experience, life experience, and there's wisdom in that. And I think the more that we go through, the more that we experience, the wisdom simply comes. You know, it's not something we have to try for. It's not something we need to be journaling about every day. It will come. And maybe it's not perceived as wisdom, but these lessons that we learn, those things within us, our intuition that says, ooh, don't do that again, or oh, you know, you've been here before. That's all wisdom. That's inner wisdom that we all have regardless of our age. But I do think there's something to be said for age, you know, getting older every day, every moment, every decade. There is wisdom that we are gleaning. And, you know, it doesn't always come from the beautiful moments, though sometimes it does. But I find that there is really deep wisdom in the difficult moments. And we don't have to understand it while we're in it, but at some point it comes.
Yeah. Hmm. I like how
You know,
you said in your,
mm,
no, go
no,
ahead.
please. I was
I
just
like how you
gonna,
said, we're
look
like,
at us.
both
We
just
both
our
got
thoughts
exciting
and
things to
yeah,
say.
are rolling
I
there.
appreciated that you mentioned the way you looked before,
Mm,
because I remember coming upon something that said grief face. And I thought, I knew this was a thing. I knew that when I looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize who I was looking at. And
mm.
I don't know how much it's discussed, and I might have come across it on social media. But
It's
I
kind of new
remember
to me.
thinking,
I haven't, I think I heard that term like a few times, but what,
yeah, it's
grief face.
so, yeah, it really is the way our physical body changes based on what is happening on the inside. And we're so familiar with this mind body connection in so many other areas. But I think, particularly when it comes to grief and loss, our physical being changes. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that and not make sure that we spent a minute on it, because it is a very real thing. And I think any of us who have suffered any loss or grief, we are very clear that we look in the mirror or we look at old pictures of ourselves and we're like, oh, she looked so carefree. They looked so carefree. It's like, I'm not that person anymore for different reasons, you know, but I did want to just acknowledge that that is a very real thing.
Yeah. Grief was very physical for me, and I
Yeah.
didn't know how to recognize that. I just felt like I was in my late 40s and I
Yeah.
just didn't be, and when I learned to recognize that, the connections, it helped me and to be able to sit in it and not avoid it and do the
Yeah.
work to physically feel better. Mentally, it allowed me to move forward, both things kind of collectively.
And that's so much of this is holding both things collectively.
Yeah, I feel like there was, I remember reading in your book, like learning to hold varying and conflicting truths.
hmm
I thought that was really powerful.
Yeah,
And it
you know,
applies to a
even
lot of different things, not just grief.
that's right. That is exactly right. It's this idea of holding, you know, I think we're encouraged to see things very black and white. In fact, it's easier for our brains to navigate black and white. This is right and this is wrong. But that big wide space in between is what reality is, right? Where there isn't one right way or one wrong way, depending on who you're talking to. And I think even holding grief and joy is the same. Like, we can do both things when we allow ourselves to.
How does a person learn to like recognize those fleeting moments of hope, those micro joys?
Mm.
I mean,
Mm.
is it, I love in your book like the exercises and the consider this. Can you, somebody that hasn't looked at the book, how would you describe that?
Yeah. Yeah, so it really is. The foundation of Microjoys is recognition and is observance, right? It's seeing what is in front of you at any particular moment while not trying to change what is, right? So that means I am going through some loss. I'm not trying to push that away. I'm not trying to change it. I'm simply allowing myself to see what is in addition to my loss, what coexists with my loss. And the reason that that awareness is so important is because it allows our brain to hold many things at once versus trying to. So what it does, right, is it says our brain is telling us, okay, I'm grieving, I'm sad, I'm going through a difficult moment. Oh, and there's this moment of beauty that exists. So what it's doing is really allowing ourselves to recognize the complexity of humanity, right? I can grieve and I can still see that thing that's there, right? That again, micro joys, those easily accessible moments of joy that exist regardless of our current circumstances. That to me extends into so many areas of our life. You know, I talked about black and white and how we're often wanting to find one right answer. I think when we start to observe micro joys, it allows us to become a bit more malleable and a bit more accepting of different truths, because we are practicing that in our everyday lives and recognizing that, you know, I can be both sad and joyful at the exact same time, you know. And the ways in which we do that is really tools of presence, anything that will bring us back to the presence or to the present moment. So something that I think about, would it be okay if I gave you a specific example?
Oh, I would love it. Yes.
Okay. So something that I find really useful in accessing microjoys is, are you familiar with the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique? It's an anxiety
Yes, but I think we
technique.
should repeat it for our listeners. I'll use it a
Yes,
lot because
we will.
tools
And
are
I'm just
good.
tools are really good. And I'm going to just look at this because I'll tell you why in a second. It's very easy to forget the order. But 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is a technique that's used for anxiety to ground us in the present moment. And
Mm-hmm.
it's 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can feel, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste.
Each of
So
your
it's
senses. Yep.
each of your senses. And I like to say available senses because not everybody has every sense, if you're blind, for example. So you're
Mm-hmm.
using whatever senses you have available to you. And you are taking a moment, and this takes 2 minutes, 3 minutes. I'm sitting here in my chair and I'm saying, name 5 things that I can see right now. That's pretty easy. I look around, they can be any 5 things, right? Name 4 things that I can feel right now. I can feel the texture of my pants. I can feel my desk. I can feel my arms. I can feel my cup. So again, it feels fairly easy. And I find it helpful to verbalize if you're able to actually speak these words aloud.
Do you
And then
sometimes ask yourself these questions?
I do. I
Yeah, because
absolutely do.
I've learned this as you ask someone else these questions.
Yes.
If they maybe it's an exercise, if someone's having a panic attack, you think that, or and
Yes.
you to ground them and to bring them back
Yes.
because how they can't be thinking about that thing that's causing them that panic, that anxiety, because they have to be explaining to you those
That's
5 things,
right.
those 4 things, and that break that it causes in our thinking pattern. I like that you are
Hmm.
using this for yourself. Okay, so now
Yeah.
3 things. You have
Yeah. So
touched
it's,
4 things. You've seen
yep,
5 things.
that's right. And now I'm listening for 3 things. Because what this is doing, right, is it's redirecting our attention by going to the things that we're now talking about. And I use this for myself by actually saying, these are 5 things I can see. These are 5 things that I can, touch. So then it goes to 3 things that you can hear. Now, it's very easy to go, well, it's quiet here. I can't hear anything. So again, you're honing your attention to say, but there is always sound. There are always sounds around us. What can I hear? I can hear the whir of the fan. I can hear the wind outside, a gentle wind. So it's really forcing my attention. And then after we get to 3 things that I can hear the birds outside. I don't know if I said a third thing. It's 2 things you can smell. So again, our instinct is often like, no smells here, nothing here. But when we become hyper aware, we recognize what we can smell, right? I can smell the summer air. I can smell the dampness in our fireplace, right? I can smell that even though we're not in the season for that. So it really hones the as we get down to our senses of smell and taste, it really is asking us to almost hyper pay attention, right? Because again, when it comes to taste, our instinct, maybe I don't taste anything, but I'm being asked to taste and it's like, I guess I do taste my coffee that I just had. Right. So after you do this, obviously we did it over a little bit of time and on video, but any one of us can do this. We can help other people do this by asking them those questions, and we can also do it for ourselves. So for me, when I have a lot of things going on, I might have multiple screens open on my desktop and somebody's calling me and my iPad's open. It's a moment that I need to ground. And again, we can do this fairly quickly, but it does redirect our attention. And that's what makes this tool, I find, so helpful in accessing Microjoys. Because once we're back in that moment, we can then become more aware of everything else that's happening around us. And that is the space and the magic where Microjoys reside. Because we have to be able to get out of our head for a moment to see these moments of beauty and joy that exist around us.
Mm, it's so good. So good. I think as a society, we just have a tendency to either be in the past or way in the future. And like
Mm-hmm.
just some of those things that you were talking about, like the sounds, when if I've been trying to learn how to meditate, just be a more of a grounding exercise, being present right now. In the world of mental health, we talk about people who think about the past, that's
Yeah.
depression, and people who are thinking about the future with fear, tends to be
Mm-hmm.
anxiety. The more we can think about right now and being present right now, things we can
Yeah.
control, potentially seeing a microjoy, that's
Mm-hmm.
the present, and how much, what an easier space that is to be, what a more pleasant space that can be for people.
Yeah. Mm. And it's a more joyful space to be. And another tool that you mentioned briefly, and I don't always mention it because not everybody wants to meditate, right? Like that's not for
Yeah.
everyone. I am a yogi. I still recognize that that is not for everyone. But I use mala beads because again, are you familiar with mala beads? Here,
No.
I'll
Oh,
show you.
vaguely. Let's talk about
So
mala
they're
beads.
beads. They have 108 beads on them. I think if you're Catholic, you might use a rosary. So this is in Buddhist
Okay.
tradition or in yogic tradition. You use these beads. There's 108 beads, and there is something to do with the number 108 that I won't get into. But you literally you touch each bead. So I sit for 15 to 17 minutes every single morning with these mala beads, and I will say some sort of, this is my time to speak to the universe or to sit quietly. So I might say, please offer me protection and guide me to XYZ. Please offer me protection and guide me to XYZ. So you're repeating yourself 108 times as you move through the
Wow.
beads. And that becomes another tool for presence, right? Because
Yeah.
there's only so many other things you can do while having to hold this bead and like touch it 108 times. And there's nothing else you can do. So your attention is zoomed in there. So I think really when it comes to so much of this mindset around microjoys is how can we bring ourselves back to the present moment? And there are so many ways to do it. So I just wanted to
Huh.
share mala beads for anyone who's interested
I like that.
in
I
that
like
as a
that.
tool.
Do you want to share what's a microjoy that you experienced today?
Oh, well, funny you should ask, because now I'm so attuned to microjoys that I spot them all the time. So I went out to bring the recycling out and I happened to pass my tomato plants and I saw a yellow one. And I thought, oh my goodness, there's a real tomato that's coming in on the vine right now. Because when they're green, I still think, yeah, but they can get knocked down and they might not grow and they might not ripen. But I saw a yellow one and I was so excited that I tripped and fell. So I bring that up just to say, and I talk about this in the book, the levity around microjoys. Like sometimes we have to laugh at how ridiculous it was. Here I am, I'm spotting this tomato. I'm super excited and I'm a grown person and I turned around and tripped and fell on my grass. And I just kind of laughed and got back up because again, when I talk about everything that's happened in my own lived experience, a moment like that is just joyful. It's so ridiculous. It's like, how did you just fall, Cyndie? You were looking at a tomato. How did you just fall? No, obviously, I'm not talking about a condition where this might happen, but literally the silliness of that moment and that microjoy. So it was spotting the yellow tomato.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Mm.
In your book, the what do we essays, scripts? What is the like
Essays. The consider this section?
no, like the stories, the each
Oh,
like
they're
where you're
essays.
like
Yeah,
you're
each essay.
yeah. I just had like a complete. Sometimes I still ask myself like, is my mind ever going to have the clarity that I think it had prior to my loss? And I
You and
spend a
me
lot of time
both.
working on that but I just like let that go. It's okay to be
Yeah.
human. It's okay to ask this beautiful Cyndie author
Yes.
on my podcast mess up on
Please
the words.
ask. That's so human. There are times that I also forget basic things that I'm like, I know I should know this. I know I used to know this. And then I'll have to ask my husband. So again, I think that's part of the process. Yeah, they're essays. They're essays.
Essays. So I
Mm-hmm.
really like the one about your cup of coffee, and then
Oh,
and what they consider this like do more nothing.
yeah. Yeah,
Two
we don't
kind
do
of
that
different
very
things.
often.
No, we're not good at it.
No, but I think we can be, right? And so much of this is we don't need to be good at everything all the time. But when we have a moment to do more nothing, Let's do that, right? Because there's always the ability to do more things, right? We have endless amounts of access to do more things. But when there is an opportunity to do less, do less. Like what is one thing I don't have to do right now? And it's so simple. We just have to be aware enough to recognize it. Right now I'm going to do less and not one more thing.
There's some freedom in that.
Mm.
How do you feel like this relates to like 2023 and just the way we live with our phones constantly and the big flashing light things all around us that are
Yeah.
just vying for our attention? How can,
Yeah.
what advice do you have for us to do more nothing and be more present? See those microjoys with just the world that we live in collectively of 2023.
Yeah, in many ways, the world's a dumpster fire in many, many ways, right? And the world is beautiful. The world is also beautiful. So both
Yeah.
of those things are true. And this access that we have to all kinds of technology and AI, and there is such profound connection possible in that. But there's also this ability to disconnect in that when we're talking about technology and lights and things that are taking our attention. And so for me, what's really important is that every single day I must sit. I must practice with my mala beads. I must remind myself to be present in this moment. Because when I do that, it's much easier for me to navigate all of the things happening around me and still shut them down, right? I used to be on Instagram 66,000 times a day and say, oh, I have to be on it. I have to be on it. Because I have this practice of grounding at least once a day, this 15 minutes with my mala beads, it sort of is a reset for my brain. So I can see all of these things happening around me and not need to engage with them. Because it really comes down to choice, right? The screens are there. That doesn't mean you have to access them. That doesn't mean you have to open them, right? And so for me, having a daily presence of grounding really is the reset that I need that allows me to say no and to do less and to not open every screen and not need to be on social media all the time. And to say, when I have something to say, I'll share it on social media. If I don't, I'm not going to post for the sake of posting. Or
Yeah.
folks that are on TikTok and posting every moment of their lives. When you have this grounding practice, you really recognize that you don't have to share everything that you do with the world.
It's not the way most people live right now. I hope that we can get back to. I've often had the conversation of like why social media was created. It was created for
Mm,
connectedness, and it
yeah,
used to be such a like kind of a beautiful thing for us that live a lot of different places and we have loved
yeah.
ones everywhere. But it's become it's rewired who we are in so many different ways.
You know, yes, it has. And I think what we are collectively being called to do is to take back a certain control isn't the right word, but to use what is human and innate in all of us, knowing that social media is there. I find social media to be incredibly connecting because I've learned how to use it
Mm.
in ways that work for me. Meaning it's not connecting when I feel like I have to post everything and I have to share my whole life with everyone. Then there's just a lot of anxiety and pressure and keeping up with the Joneses and making sure that what I'm doing looks cool and interesting. But over the years, I've learned how to tap into my own inner wisdom and use it in ways that still feel connecting. Right. And part of that is saying, even the accounts that I follow, do these accounts bring me joy? Do these accounts make me feel good about myself? Sometimes that even means not following my own friends. That doesn't mean that I don't love that I love them any less, but it means every time I see their pictures, their account, it brings me such anxiety. I can't invite that in. It doesn't mean you're shutting out friendships, but you're literally saying, how does this make me feel? So it's going through social media, just looking at who's coming up on your feed and saying, how does this make me feel? Does this make me feel inspired, uplifted? Am I learning something? Am I feeling motivated? That's not to say that every account that I follow, makes me feel warm and fuzzy, but is it inviting me into something that is useful for my life? I follow a lot of accounts around anti-racism or LGBTQIA accounts. I'm not looking for anyone in any community to make me feel good all the time. But what I do recognize is that if I am sharing my brain and my mind with anyone else, it has to be of benefit to the greater good, to myself and the greater good. And so just scrolling through social media and saying, does this account do these things for me? If it doesn't, I allow myself to unfollow without guilt. So I think sometimes we are just all being collectively called to tap into what we know is true and use our own common sense when it comes to social media.
That's fantastic. I
Mm-hmm.
get to spend a lot of time with young people, with teenagers particularly.
Lucky.
And yes, there's the coolest people. And I've learned a
Mm-hmm.
lot of those social media skills from them. And I feel like,
Yeah,
like the greater society, they are like, oh, kids are addicted to this. And, like it's creating all of their problems, but like learning to control it. And I just love that.
yeah.
Is it feeding them? Is it that purpose for both and being able to unfollow? That's powerful stuff.
Yes, I love that. Is it feeding us, Is it feeding us?
Mm-hmm.
Because there are times that it's not, and when we simply ask ourselves, we know the answer.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I encourage kids. That's who I get the most time to speak with. But I think
Yeah,
this is a good reminder for all of us is like pay attention to how you're feeling and how much
that's
time you're
right.
spending on these things. Like there's an exact correlation. Like, and
Yeah,
if you're feeling good, you're probably looking at good things and spending the right amount of time. But if you're not feeling good, maybe I was sucked into that rabbit hole a little bit too
that's
much in the
right.
past 24 hours.
That's right, right? I read one post and I went down and then I read 316,000 comments and now I just feel like garbage.
Yeah.
It's like, how can we, I think particularly young people, but all of us, how can we avoid that? In what ways can folks pull themselves away from it? And sometimes it means being in community IRL, in person
Mm,
with our phones down. Can we spend a half an hour with our phones down? Can you put your phones in this box for 30 minutes?
yeah.
Like give
Community. Like,
yourselves in community. Yes, spend
yeah.
time in community and also gamify moving away from social media by saying, we're going to do this for 30 minutes. 30 minutes, we're all going to put it in the box. And that means I don't care if we all sit here and stare at each other for 30 minutes. I mean, that's not what will happen, but really, because our brains now are wired to gamify everything. I meditate and I get a star that says, this is the 87th day that you've meditated. I'm like, woo, I'll come back tomorrow. Like our brains are now wired for that. So we can
That
gamify
reward.
putting our phones
Yes.
down, put
Yeah.
your phones in this box for half an hour, for 16 minutes, whatever it is. And let's try that and see what else we do. And then over time, we start to realize like, oh, I feel much differently when I'm not constantly on my phone, or on my laptop.
So true. So true. There's two things I like that I still have on my in the front of my mind that I like want to ask you about. And
Yes.
one might not need like a lot of commentary, and it's maybe just me like sharing. I don't believe in comparing losses at all. I know that collectively every single human carries loss in some
Yeah.
capacity and in some way. And I sometimes when I see people, I'm like, oh, if I could just like be able to let them know that I know that they carry a loss versus that, I'm judging them for this or they're judging me for that. I'm like, oh, we maybe could be in a better space. But when you talked about your 10-month period of the many things that happened to you that were very traumatic and hard and deep, there's one thing that kind of you talk about that you lost a friendship, and
Mm-hmm.
you didn't mention that it's in your book, and I think it stuck with me because I
Yeah.
feel like friendships change with time, and
Yeah.
here talking about community and how important that is, and for young people who value friendship so deeply, and they're growing in this world of social media where friendship looks very, very different.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but then also in your book, you talk about finding the microjoys and the beautiful things that friends did do for you in that period of 10 months where you didn't know who you were looking at in the mirror. What were some
Yeah.
of those things that community brought to you that potentially were you now see as microjoys?
Yeah. So a few things I want to speak to about that, right? Is this friendship that I lost. It didn't get lost. She just simply stopped talking to me. And this was after decades of friendship. And the reason that I want to just spend a second there is because particularly for young people, having this understanding that the relationships in our lives serve us when they do, but that doesn't mean they're going to be there forever. And so there is this certain non-clinging to our relationships that was absolutely a huge loss, and by the way, I have not forgiven her for this. Like, this is still stuff I'm working on.
You're working on it. I bet
I'm
you're
working on it. I'm working on it because the forgiveness piece is for me, not for anybody else. But there is this, just like we talked earlier about we change, our friends change, and what they can handle and be with you on shifts as we all go through things. That doesn't make them good or bad. It doesn't make us good or bad. It means they can't be there for this. And that is very, very human. Particularly, I think back to when I was 16 or 17 years old, the value that I placed on friendships is different than the value I place on friendships today, right? Today, the value I place on friendships comes from a place of balance and equality, where before I think my friends were everything. When I was 16 and they felt like the end all be all of my world. So I just wanted to acknowledge that about friendships and to say that some of the things that friends did during that time, I remember getting a ring at the door and it was a 6-pack of ice cream. I did not know you could deliver ice cream to people, but someone, a dear friend, had ice cream delivered.
awesome.
Something else they did, like not flowers, but ice cream. Something else was, I have one friend who would just constantly send me cat memes. She wouldn't say anything because we don't always need to talk, right? So in the middle of everything, I would get this hilarious meme or video to,
Awesome.
again, breaks the spell. It temporarily breaks the spell. And that I love that you posed that question the way you did, Kari, because it simply shows that gray space that we talked about earlier, right? Both things can be true. You can have a friendship that ends and all of these friends who show up in different ways. All of it is true and all of it is relevant and all of it is real. And we feel the way we feel.
It's just like gray can be grace, like that gray
Mm,
space, grace for yourself, grace for others, grace for those friends that change. I like in
yeah.
your consider this, like where you challenge people to say, or just consider this, not challenge. That's challenge is maybe a little
Mm-hmm.
too strong in my word. Things that friends bring to your, like you can remember, like important rituals and family and friends, and like some of the things that I've learned from viewing, and I would now, after reading your book, consider it a microjoy. Like I have a friend that
Mm.
always says at the end, "Thank you for your time," and also like
Mm.
has taught me to be able to say, she will always say, "I love you, Kari," and like
Yes.
I hear that, I'm like, "Oh, I love you too," but I don't know how to say that.
Yes.
Different relationships, different things, different microjoys.
I love that.
Oh, this has been a really wonderful conversation. Your book, like, I feel like you and I possibly have a little bit of similar personality traits and values. And like this morning when I was like walking out to record this podcast, I was like, this book is like it's a feel good challenge. I don't like
Mm,
glass half full, like, and that's who I want to be. And sometimes I
yeah.
struggle to be that person. And I feel like I was that person before.
Yeah.
But I want to do the work to, and it just felt like it was such a good reminder. I loved, I love it.
Mm,
Love it, love it, love it.
thank you for saying that.
So I want everyone to pick up Microjoys Finding Hope, especially when life is not okay by Cyndie Spiegel. And I'm going to look at your badass woman. It's kind of on hold, but I'm
Dear
going to look for
grandma's
that.
woman.
Yeah. But so we end every podcast with the same question. And that question is, what does the world need to hear right now?
Hmm. The world needs to hear that there is joy anyway. Regardless of everything else that is happening, because those things are real and those things are true, there is still joy anyway.
Awesome. Joy anyway. Cyndie Spiegel, thank you so much for joining me today on a hopeful conversation. Be sure to tune in to our next episode for our listeners. And until then, remember, hold on, pain ends.